Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Before we get started on hot off the presses, creating, storing, and sharing newsletters, we're going to go through just a little bit of housekeeping. So to start off, all of your microphones are muted. And if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the chat window. The chat is being monitored today by one of my favorite ClubExpress team members, Devin. So if you have any questions on our topic today, you don't have to wait until the end of our session to ask them. You can feel free to enter those in as you think of them. A recording of this webinar and a recording of all of our other webinars will be available on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So if you aren't able to stay for the entire webinar, or if you'd like to share it with someone, you can go to our YouTube channel and check that out. And speaking of webinars, if you're curious to see what other topics we have coming up on our calendar, you can go to clubexpress.com/calendar and browse all of the webinars that we have coming up. So we have some webinars that our sales team hosts to invite prospective customers to see what Club Express can do for them. So if you have anyone who might be interested, you can feel free to point them to our calendar. And as I mentioned, all of our webinars and our video tutorials are available on our YouTube channel. So if you happen to be watching another video, or if you just go to youtube.com, you can type in clubexpress.com in the search bar. That is clubexpress.com with the .com spelled out, and hit that subscribe button so that you get notified whenever we post a new webinar or a new tutorial to our channel. And lastly, if you are currently using ClubExpress, and particularly if you're enjoying ClubExpress, we'd love to hear from you. You can go to clubexpress.com/reviews and leave us a review to tell us about your experience. Your reviews not only help us learn what we're doing well and what we can improve on, but it also helps other prospective customers determine if ClubExpress is going to be a good fit for them. So we encourage you to head over to clubexpress.com/reviews and leave us a review. And without further ado, we'll dive into today's topic. So today's topic is a little bit of a special one. We had an idea coming from our aging in place villages. So if some of you aren't familiar, Club Express also has another website service called Run My Village. So aging in place villages use Run My Village, which is basically Club Express with other features to help aging in place villages manage all of their services and tasks that they provide for their members. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about newsletters as they relate to aging in place villages, of course, if you are an aging in place village, part of the Village to Village network, we're hosting sort of tandem topics. So this month, aging in place villages are going to be talking about newsletter best practices within their user group. So if you are part of the Village to Village network, don't forget your Run My Village user talk on February 21st. So make sure that if you don't get a chance to stay for today's full webinar on newsletters, that you do take a peek at the recording before heading over to your user talk. And if you are an aging in place village and you want more information on that, you can go over to v2vnetwork.org. That's VTOV network.org. You can find more information about that webinar. So today we're going to be covering not duplicate topics, but separate topics. We want to go through all of the options that you have for how you can create, share, and store all of your newsletters. There are a few different options within your Club Express website, and we're going to discuss the pros and cons and the steps for each one of them so you can figure out what process might be best for you and your organization. And we're also going to feature some tips from our Director of Marketing, Hannah. So Hannah releases a Club Express newsletter every month, and we talk to her to get some insight and tips on how she manages to stay on that schedule and keep people interested in her newsletter. So we'll get to those towards the end of our session today. Our session today is going to be a little bit of a shorter one. We do want to get through all of the different ways that you can share newsletters, but we aren't going to go through the process of actually building those out. So what you're going to see in the chat would be a couple of extra links that will talk about how to create an email and how to create a news article on your site. So those tasks we've covered in some other tutorials and webinars. So today we're going to we're going to take a step back and take a look at the modules and how we can use them to share our newsletters. Now, the first way that many people are probably already sharing their newsletter would be using a blast emailing. So we're going to take a visit back to this slide to kind of recover everything that we've gone through. But what I want to do is first go to our demo site and take a look at using blast emailing to set up a newsletter and what that's going to look like from the perspective of your members. So right now, everyone should be seeing the Northwest Balloon Club, which is our demo club that we use to share topics on our webinars. And we also use it in a lot of our tutorial videos. So on our demo club right now, we can see that I have a submenu item that I've created just to help with today's webinar so that we can quickly navigate to a lot of the things that we're going to take a look at today. Now, the first thing that I want to do is see what using blast emailing to display and share your newsletters is going to look like from a member's perspective. So if I have followed all of my steps, and we'll get to those steps in a minute, and I'm a member visiting my club's website, and I want to view all of my past newsletters or maybe view an archive of those newsletters. And I've been using blast emailing. I can see all of the newsletters that have been sent, all of the items that have been sent monthly, and I can browse through and click read more. And I can view each of the newsletters that have been sent to me. Now, of course, I might have these sitting in my inbox already. Maybe I've set up a folder for them, but this is a way to categorize and corral all of those emailed newsletters that you're sending out into one space. So from a member's perspective, it's pretty easy. I'm going into my individual, I'm visiting my emailing module from the front end, and I'm just able to see these individual emails as individual newsletters. Now, let's talk about the way that we've set this up and how we got here. And the first thing that I want to do is that talk about categories. Now, in a lot of spaces across your website, you're going to have the opportunity to create categories. So sometimes those categories are really just useful for administrators, and sometimes those categories can be visible to your members. For example, in your event calendar, those categories are not just for you as admins, but your members can also search through and filter your event calendar by category. Now, with blast emailing, you do have the opportunity to set up categories. And for the most part, those categories are really just going to be for admin eyes only and to allow you to search through your sent emails a little more efficiently. So I'm in the communications tab and I'm visiting our blast emailing module. But in this case, I'm using categories to determine which categories of emails are going to be displayed for my members when I make this available to them on the user side of my website. So under my configure option within blast emailing, I'm going to visit my categories page. Now, I have several categories that I've set up already. You're also familiar that if you are an organization that has subgroups, you can also set up specific categories for subgroups. So we encourage you to go back and take a look at some of our past emailing webinars to go through how you can set up some of your emailing framework, how you can actually build a message. For today, we're just going to be moving through these topics so we can talk about more than one module. And when I'm adding in my emailing categories, I'll go ahead and select my add category button so we can see what that form looks like. I'm naming my category, and this checkbox is really what you want to pay attention to. Allow on view email page. The page that we were looking at right off the start was our view email page. So when you make emailing available on your website menu, it's not actually giving your members the ability to send blast emails. What it's doing is allowing them to view an archive of those sent messages from specific categories. Now, there's no stopping you from making every single category of your emails available on that particular page. You certainly can, but really here you're focusing on moving just your newsletters to that particular page. And we can see here that we have a quick reference as to what's visible on that page and what isn't. And it's just our newsletter category. Now, a couple of extra things to note. When you're creating an individual email and you've categorized that email, I'll go ahead and select Add Emailing. And right at the top under our basic information, I'll select Edit Basics. And the very first thing that you would do if you are following those steps and creating that email is select your category. By default, the default category is going to be the category that's assigned to that email. But all you have to do is just select the newsletter category that you've created for these particular emails. And my Allowed on View Email Page box is automatically checked. If I was sending out an additional email that perhaps I didn't want visible on the newsletter page, but I categorized it under newsletters or under the category that I'm displaying on that page, I can uncheck the box for individual emails. So if you're creating categories and you're using those categories just for newsletters or perhaps for newsletters, for event emails, for donation emails, you want to keep those separate. If you're using the default category and you're not really interested in setting up separate categories for your emails, maybe that's just not something that is going to be beneficial for you and you only want your newsletters to be displayed on the emailings page, you can still opt to have the category shown and instead just uncheck the box for every email that you don't want shown on your View Emailings page. Now, that's how you get the email to display for your members. And that's how you would categorize the email. Now, a couple of other things that I want to talk about and just touch on, because we have touched on them and we've spoken about them a lot in our past webinars, would be creating a template. So almost every time we talk about emailings, we talk about creating a template to make your work just a little bit easier. So if I take a look at my templates that I've created so far, I have a handful of system templates that were created for me by ClubExpress, and I also have additional templates that I've created myself. So if I take a look at my newsletters template and I select that edit icon in case I'd like to make changes, I can see that I've got a lot of content here. Really what I did was I just added in my header image and I have my important news, and then I have some staggered news and links and images. And at the very bottom, I have my footer for my email as well as some social networking links that I like to include. And this is all included in my website, in my emailing template. So what that means is that every time I want to use this template, all of this information gets added in for me. Now, you'll see that for each of my individual text sections, I just have some placeholder text that I've added in here. You don't have to use placeholder text. If you just craft a newsletter for yourself, you can save it as a template as is. You don't necessarily need to replace the text for the template because you can replace that text at any point when you're creating the email. So if we go back into our emailing administration, for example, and I go ahead and add an emailing from the start, I'll skip over my basic information and my distribution list. And in my email editing area, I would select my templates button and drag over my newsletter template. And here I have all of the images and the text that I've added already. Now, this is placeholder text. So every month when I'm choosing my new member business to spotlight, I just go into my one column text heading here, select that edit icon, and I can continue to edit each one of these sections. And I can also change the link if I'd like to link to that particular member's business every month that I feature someone new. I can change any links and any images if I select my image and I choose my edit the properties of that image. And I can also insert or replace it with a brand new image. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind when you're using templates, each of these sections can be removed individually. So if for some reason one particular month you don't have your regulation station update, you can delete that section. It won't affect the template. It will only affect this single email. And then the last step when you're talking about sharing these newsletters, of course, for an email would be sending the email. So once you send that email, it's going to go to anyone on your distribution list. If this is a newsletter that you're sending to your members, if this is a newsletter that you're sending to everyone, it's going to be sent out to everyone on your distribution list. Definitely watch some of our previous webinars on creating an emailing to learn more about that basic information section and creating that distribution list. Now, let's talk about the last step. Once we've set up our category and we've told the system only show these certain emails in this category on that emailing page, We have to talk about actually getting that emailing page back on our website. So if I go into my control panel, we're going to show how we got all of these links here. Now, when I'm in my communications tab, I'm going to select the configure icon in my control panel, and that's going to allow me to manage all of the functions and the modules in that panel. I'm going to select my emailing module, and under the configure option, and this is true for any module on your site, you can change the menu text and the function name for each of those. So in this case, what I've done is I've changed just the menu text. I haven't changed the function name so I can keep track of it on the back end, but I've changed just the menu text to newsletters. And in parentheses for this webinar, I put emailing. You wouldn't have to put emailing, but so that I could tell them apart when I'm navigating to them from the menu. And because I've changed the menu text, I'll go ahead and cancel out of this. When I'm looking at that item on my menu, I can see that my newsletters emailing module is on my menu. And of course, to do that, I'm just selecting my website tab and selecting menus to add the emailing module to either my full menu or my submenu. Now, I created a submenu because I have 3 different ways that I want to show off how we can create all of these newsletters and share them. So in this case, what I did was I added a new submenu. And here's my hot off the presses submenu. I can click that edit icon to see that when I'm choosing my individual menu items, I'm seeing the name that I've added in as the menu name. So when we're taking a look at all of our modules, I can see each individual module that hasn't been added to my menu, and then I can see my emailing module, my news module that's already been added, and I have a custom page that I've added as well. So to cover what we've just talked about using blast emailing, the first step is setting up that newsletter category, and you want to make sure that you're allowing that category to be displayed on that emailings page, or that you're noting individual emails as you send them out to display on that emailing page. We encourage you to watch our webinar, Creating and Emailing. It's available on our YouTube channel. You'll, of course, categorize the email using that fresh category that you just created and then send your email. Now, to store those emailed newsletters and to display them to your members, we assigned the emailings module a different menu name. We suggest newsletters, but you can use anything that you'd like. And then we added the module to our website menu. In our case, we added it to a submenu, but you can, of course, add it to your full website menu. Now, there are pros and cons to this. And as we're going through the rest of our options, you'll see pros and cons for each of them. So a huge pro is that you can create a template that you can reuse over and over. So I created a template in probably about 20 or 30 minutes, and I'm able to use that template constantly. I can remove individual sections if I don't need them, but it saves me a lot of time. And the way that you're saving and storing those emails creates an automatic archive for you. So as long as you are using that categorization feature within Blast Emailing, you're able to have that sort of automatic archive set up for you. And it is the fewest number of steps. Now, some cons that you have with choosing blast emailing as your way to send out your newsletters. The first would be some styling limitations that you might have, which is true with sending out any email. You have limited styling that's available. Of course, you have all of the styling tools that are built into blast emailing, but you want to be mindful of how much you're actually adding into your email. And we have some more tips in some of our previous webinars that we posted on emailing. And the archive is less visually appealing than a news and articles archive. And we're going to take a look at what news and articles looks like as an archived set of your newsletters up next. So keep in mind that there are differences in how they're going to look. So just to refresh our memory, this is what it would look like for your members if you are displaying your sent emailed newsletters as an archive of newsletters. So we have everything separated with our title. You can see that we sent an email several times to test it with ourselves, and you'll see why in just a moment. And we select read more, and it looks just like an email would in our browser, but the main page leaves a little bit to be desired. So let's move on and talk about using the news and articles module instead. So there are a handful of similar steps that we're going to take here. So let's dive in. Using news and articles, I'm going to pop into my control panel. And the first thing that we're going to do, if you haven't already guessed, is to set up a category. So I'm going to select my news option for my communications tab. And right when you visit your news manager, I can go ahead and select search without entering any search criteria. And it's just going to give me a list of all of the news articles that I've created. And I can also filter that by just my active newsletters as well and get a shorter list. So I'll go ahead and select manage categories. And in this case, categories aren't necessarily required, but they're very useful if you plan on using widgets across your site. So if you aren't familiar with widgets that you might be placing on your homepage or your custom pages, be sure to check out some of our webinars on our page builder. One of the widgets that you have access to is a newsfeed widget, where you can present your members and non-members a list of all of your recently published news articles within your news and articles module. Now, with that, you can separate which articles are visible in which widgets. So, for example, on your committees page, a custom page that you've created for committees, you might only want to share news related to that committee. Maybe it's your event planning committee and you only want to share event updates. But maybe you don't want to share general announcements or community news, or you don't want to share your newsletters. And we're going to talk about how you can do that in a couple of different ways. But first things first, when we add a category, all we're doing in this case is naming the category. We're not telling the system to send those newsletters anywhere. We're going to be doing that ourselves. And we have a handful of different categories that we've set up, and we're going to focus on our newsletter category. So when I go back into my news administration, I want to pull up my February newsletter. This is the same newsletter that I was using in my blast emailings module. All I did was I recreated the look of that newsletter within my news and articles module. Because if you'll recall, news and articles are built using our advanced content editor, which has a lot of the same features as our page builder, as our email builder. So the tools are similar enough that I was able to recreate that. Now, when I'm adding in a new article, remember that I'm first configuring the article. And with our configuration, I select my category. So I would select newsletters, and then I enter in the rest of my information for that particular article. And then under my options, so we have the option to show this on the main news page, show the active date on the news story, and show the author. The one that I want to focus on would be to show this on the main news and articles page. So with each individual newsletter, you're making the decision of whether or not to put that news article on your main news page. So we've already taken a look at our newsletters that are being displayed from our sent emails. Let's take a look at what that looks like when we've displayed our articles on the main news page. So if I select news and articles from my news module, I added that just so I'd know which one to select. We can see right away, it looks even better than our blast emailing display page. So we've chosen to show specific articles, and we've only chosen some of our newsletters here. And we have a little share image that appears with each of our newsletters. We have our short description of the newsletter or our summary of the newsletter. When we select read more, we can see our newsletter built for us. So you're probably thinking this looks very similar to the email. Is it the email? It is not the email. This is something that we created just within news articles. So we're going to go back a couple pages here and see exactly how we did that. So when I'm taking a look at our February newsletter and I select my configure option, I am showing this on my main news page. We have our summary, we have all of our relevant information. And when I added in my actual content for the news article, when I edit my article text, I'll go ahead and expand my editor here. All I've done is add individual page rows, which are very similar to the sections of content that you would be adding in a blast email. So I have all of the same images, I have all of the same text, all of the same options. I've just created this newsletter within my news and articles module. And I've added that to my main news page. Now, in order to share this newsletter, I have two options. The first would be to embed the news article in an email using the HTML element. And we're going to talk about that and some of the caveats to go with that. And then the second would be one of the easier ways would be to just send a link to the newsletter in an email. And then, of course, the con of that is it adds a step for the user. So let's take a look at a couple of the ways that we can share these newsletters. So remember, we've created our newsletter within our news and articles module. All we've done is configure our newsletter to display on the main news page and add in our content. Now we'll go back into the control panel because at some point we have to get this out to our members. So we'll pop back into the emailing tab, the emailing module. And I'm going to go ahead and add a fresh email. And I'll skip over my basic information and my distribution list, and we'll talk about the elements that we want to add. Now let's talk about that first element, our HTML element. Our first step would be dragging over our HTML element. And I'm going to select the pencil icon or my edit icon. Now, you're probably noticing that this looks strikingly similar to editing individual sections of text within the email. It does, except that there are more editing options that are available because you're using the HTML editor. So at the top, I have an additional icon that's available to me when I'm using this particular element as opposed to the plain text, the text element that's available as part of other sections of emails. If I select insert news item or article, not the help icon, but if anyone is interested, the help icon will in fact take you to the help system. So we'll go ahead and select this and select our news article. And now I can choose my individual category to narrow down my selection, or I can just select search and choose from all of my active newsletters. So I'm going to choose the same exact February newsletter that I've been working with, and I can include or exclude the headline. I'm going to go ahead and exclude the headline because maybe I want to add in some additional styling or some additional page rows that are going to add in some extra information. I'll go ahead and insert my article, and right in the HTML editor, I can see that all of those sections that I added into my newsletter are going to populate for me automatically. I have the same images. I have some of the same font choices, and we'll sort of talk about why they might be displaying slightly differently. But I've really eliminated a good chunk of my work here. Now you're probably thinking, well, where's my header? Where's my footer? I can go ahead and do this a couple of different ways. I can create templates that are just a header and just a footer. So you'll remember that as part of my newsletter header, I had a nice, or as part of my newsletter, I had a really nice footer that I created for the bottom, a nice gray footer that included my contact information and my social networking links. So I can add in my individual sections here. Let's say maybe I want to delete a couple of these here. Maybe I want to move some sections around. I can do that and delete these individual sections just to use a part of my template. Or I can save just one section for my footer and drag over my footer every time I want to add in my newsletter. Now, if we go ahead and go back into our emailing administration, and I'd like to add in a fresh email. Now, we saw what it looked like when we added in, when we embedded the news article in the email using that HTML element. It essentially brought over the entire news article that I had created within my news and articles module. And then the other option, and I'll just add a one column text. The other option that you have is to link to the newsletter. And there are two different ways that you can do that. The first would be adding in a text element and then choosing from our link builder. And you can choose to link to any number of things on your website. That could be linking to a blog post, linking to an event, linking to a donation fund. And then, of course, the second would be a standalone element using our link or button element. And it gives us the same link builder where we can choose an individual news article that we'd like to link to. Now, let's talk about those share options just a little bit. When you are embedding a news article in an email, you want to pay attention to some of the formatting that might get stripped or some of the styling that might get stripped, because there are some components of the email that just may not translate well, not necessarily depending on the email client. It could be the browser, it could be any number of things. And the second option also has its share of cons. So if you're sending a link to a newsletter in an email, it adds an extra step for your user. So instead of opening up an email and being able to read the newsletter right there, they're opening up an email, maybe reading a paragraph or so of some text, and then clicking a link to take them to your site to read the news article. So if you're thinking about ease of use, if you're using this particular route, probably embedding the news article would be the fewest number of steps for yourself and for your members, but also keep in mind that this is one of those situations. And of course, all of these situations are ones in which you want to send yourself a test of the email that you're sending out, especially if you are embedding a news article that you're creating. Even with templates, every time you make a template change, you want to make sure that you're sending yourself a test so that displays the way you intend it to display. Bonus points if you happen to have multiple email addresses that you can test this with. If you have a Gmail, an Outlook, and a Yahoo, you pretty much cover most of the email providers that people might use. And you can see how it might display differently for some users. It gives you a really good sense of what your members are experiencing. So if anyone calls you or sends you a quick message, hey, Sally, I wasn't able to access last week's newsletter. Some of the images just aren't appearing for me the right way, you might be able to help them troubleshoot. So let's talk about the ways now that we can store newsletters. So we've talked about the way that we can share the newsletters if we're using our news and articles module. Now let's talk about the ways that we store them. So going back to my menu here, if I'm talking about the basic option, which is sharing my news articles that I've written within the news and articles module, I'm just sharing my news and articles module right on the menu. And what I've done, I'll go ahead and select my control panel. I will select my configure option and show you that within news, all I did was change the function and the menu text names. So the original name is news articles. I left my function name as news and I changed the menu text to read newsletters. And then of course, as I mentioned, I added news module to the end of mine so that I would be able to tell which one is which. So if you're adding all of your newsletters to your news and articles module, you can add it to your menu and your members can browse through because you've selected which individual articles display on the main news page. Now, another way that you can display your news and articles and store your news articles in a way that's slightly different, looks even nicer than this particular layout, is by using the news articles widget on a single custom page. And the way that might look is right under our news and articles option, I have my newsletters custom page option. And again, this looks a little bit better. So we have all of our share images. We have some separation of text here. So there's a little bit of a different layout. And of course, if you are interested in learning how to manage some of this, you can pop into some of our additional sessions on custom pages in the page builder. So you can see how you might make changes to the way this page is laid out or the way the widget is laid out. But this is just adding a news and article widget. This is the grid layout of that widget to a custom page. So if I select my edit icon on my flyout menu, and I take a look at the admin side of this custom page, so what it looks like when you're actually editing the page, I have a single page row. I don't have anything fancy on this page. And all I've done is added my page row. And to that page row, I've added my recent news widget, my news feed widget. And we can see here that my options are a list, cards, or a grid. Now, to show you what each of those are going to look like, we'll go ahead and drag over our page row again. We'll select our news feed widget. And I will look for articles from the last 90 days, and let's select our list view and just our newsletters category. So the list view is going to be pretty bare bones. This is usually something that you might see on a homepage or at the very bottom of another custom page that you might be just sharing some quick articles through. And then if we add in, or if we change the style of this widget to our card view and apply our changes, and we'll wait for our changes to refresh. Oh, well, they don't want to refresh today. However, the recent news articles widget has 3 display options, and we have gone through those options in our deep dive into news and articles in our most recent webinar. So be sure to take a look at that. These additional display options are relatively new. The grid view is what you're looking at within this section, and it's what we've added to our custom page to display all of those news articles. So there are really a handful of different ways that function pretty similarly, but there are caveats to each. So with using the news and articles module, pros are it creates an automatic archive just like using blast emailing, and you have several different display options. You have 3 different display options on custom pages alone. You also have the option to display those news articles just through the module on your website's menu. A huge con to news and articles for some folks is that you can't create a template or copy news articles. So you would be continuing to create that section of content every time. And it really just depends on your workflow. For some folks, if you can't create a template or copy articles, that really isn't that huge of a deal, depending on the trade-off that you might be getting from that automatic archive with those additional display options. So this is why we want to outline the pros and cons of each one, because for some folks, the cons may not matter as much. Now, the last option that we want to talk about before we dive into our newsletter tips from Hannah would be using your document library as your newsletter article, as your newsletter archive, excuse me. So the first thing that you want to note is that you wouldn't be able to create a news article within your document library. It would really be the way that you store and share them. So this would be an option that you might use if you're using an outside editor to create your newsletter. So if you even are using something as simple as Word and printing your newsletter to a PDF, it doesn't have to be that you're using Illustrator or any other kind of PDF creator. So if you're just using any outside editor to create your newsletter and you want to store them in your document library, and this also goes for if you are emailing your newsletters and maybe you want to add them to your document library and you're printing those to PDF, we'll go ahead and we'll pop into our document library and we'll take a look at just the folder structure that we've set up. It is a very basic folder structure, but there's one thing that I want to sort of point out that's kind of a neat little trick that you can use when you're showing off your newsletters. And I'm just navigating to my newsletters folder, and I have 2023 set up and ready to go. So within my 2023 newsletter folder, I have January and February's newsletters, and I also have something called current newsletter. So what I'm using this for is to give my members a quick link to my most recent newsletter, and that's it. And when I select hot off the presses in my submenu one more time, and I select current newsletter, I'm taking a look at my most recent newsletter, and it didn't just get there magically, and it isn't something that got there automatically either. What I did was I added in my February newsletter as its own newsletter, but I also added the same newsletter to this item that I have marked current at the very top of my screen here. And this is what I'm using as sort of an evergreen link to my most recent newsletter. And the way that I've set that up is, first off, I added in my individual newsletter, but every month when I send a new newsletter, I select the edit icon for my current newsletter only. So let's say that it is now March and I've added in my March newsletter. I'm going to go ahead and select the edit icon. And I'm not going to touch any of the previous information, but right underneath my document format here, I'm going to select my update checkbox. And this is allowing me to update the document that is being stored in that space. without having to delete it and add a new document. I can just replace the existing document and the link to that document won't change. So you would use this for versioning if you're creating an additional copy of something and you want it to replace the old copy that was sitting on your site. In this case, all I'm doing is I'm replacing my old newsletter, last month's newsletter, with my current newsletter. So we saw previously that when we opened up that newsletter, it was going to be my individual or my February newsletter. So I'm going to select a brand new newsletter. And I'll go ahead and I'll save my changes. You can use a new file name or you can preserve the original file name. That's entirely up to you. And I can also adjust a preview image. That preview image isn't something that's going to be used now, but it can be used in the future. I'll go ahead and save my changes. And now when I select hot off the presses and I select my current newsletter, I'm seeing a completely different newsletter. And this is just a print off of one of our most recent webinar emails that we've sent out. So this is a way, and we'll go through the setup process in just a second here, but this is a way that you can link to your most recent newsletter right away without having to make too many changes. So I haven't recreated anything. I've just printed a copy of my newsletter and I've added it and replaced the current newsletter item on my site. Now, when we talk about how this link got here, that's the final step. So first things first is within my current newsletter, I want to select my clipboard icon. And I'm going to go ahead and copy in my my URL that I'm going to be creating an external link for. So I want to grab this URL. Remember that anytime you add in or replace the document, so when I replaced it with March's newsletter or when I replace it with April's newsletter, this link isn't going to change, which is super beneficial because what I want to do is I want to copy this link. I'm going to go into my control panel. I'm still in my website tab. So I am going to select menus and scroll all the way down to the bottom. And I can see under my external menu links, here's my current newsletter. And the way that I set up this link, I'll go ahead and select the edit option, which will show me the exact same dialog that I would select or that I would see if I selected add external link instead. It's just that all of my information here is filled in for me. So I've named the link and I've also named the menu text the exact same thing. It's not all of my newsletters, it's just the current newsletter. And then I've added in my address, which is the copied link that I stole from the document library. And then I can just choose where I want that link to open. And remember, that link is never going to change. So I'll go ahead and cancel out of this. And then all I would have to do is once I have that external link set up, I can add it to a submenu or my main menu. And if we take a look at hot off the presses, we can see here's my current newsletter item. And I would have found that just by selecting external links from my available menu items. So now let's talk about some newsletter tips from Hannah. Go through and have a quick visual aid of what the differences are between some of the emails that we've sent out. So newsletter tips from Hannah. Hannah is our director of marketing. You may have seen her fabulous newsletter that she sends out on a monthly basis, highlighting some tech tips from ClubExpress, highlighting our upcoming webinars and just general things that are happening around ClubExpress. So we reached out to her to get some of her tips for her fabulous newsletters. And the first that she offered us was if you are struggling to keep to a schedule, that really only comes with practice and discipline. So of course, it is difficult to get content out on a regular basis. There are plenty of other things that you might be doing within your organization that don't include sitting down to write a full newsletter every month. Leave yourself a little wiggle room in case things go bananas. Direct quote from Hannah. So if you're concerned that getting something out on a monthly basis might be a little bit of a stretch, consider going bi-monthly, every 2 months, to see how it feels for a workload from your perspective. And if that works, then you can go in and start adding in additional months until you feel like you're comfortable with the amount of content that you're putting out. And if you're struggling for ideas of what to put in your newsletter, especially if you want to commit to sending something out every month, look to your stakeholders for topic inspiration. So from Hannah, make sure people who read it get something from it. So what are people opening your newsletters to find? Do they just want to find out when the next member meeting is? Are they more interested in when you are going for your nightly bike rides? Make sure that the people who open your newsletters, even if it's not everyone, get something that's relevant to them from the newsletter. And if you're looking at ways to get people to open those newsletters, we always encourage catchy subject lines. So you might notice that some people or that some companies that you might get emails from tend to get a little bit cheeky in their subject lines just to make you chuckle, make you curious, make you want to open that email. My favorite example that Hannah gave us was, "You won't believe what Rosie said in last month's meeting." It doesn't always have to be something so salacious, but it does get a little bit of a chuckle from your members, and they might be curious enough to open that newsletter, and it could invite them to be curious about further newsletters. So don't just get them in there with that subject line. Make sure that the full newsletter is going to be relevant to them. And then for some styling, we recommend bold headers and at least a 12-point body font. So we want to make sure that your readers aren't squinting, that they're able to see this and that it renders nicely, especially if they're looking at this on a mobile phone. You don't want that text to be too small. So I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm going to take a look at what some of our additional options look like when you are adding in newsletters from emails or just sending an email out. Now, to leave you with this, on the left, starting from the left, this is what our newsletter looked like when we sent it out and crafted it just within blast emailing. And then next to that, we have our news article that is displayed on displayed within our news and articles module. And then to the right, we have what the news article looks like when it's been embedded in an email. So we can see definitely some striking similarities, but one of the things that you kind of want to notice is that there are some minor differences in some of the text that's been used, some of the formatting, certainly on an emailed news article, that there's a lot of stacking involved as opposed to that staggered look that we have, not just within our email, but within our news article itself. So this is why we want to encourage you to explore the different options. We also want to encourage you to always send yourself a test. So it may not have occurred to you that the emailed news article was going to display in that stacked fashion. And you can see that because of that, the text that we would normally have right after the typewriter is now right next to the text that we would have with our balloon photo as well. Now, when they're staggered, it looks great, but when they're stacked one on top of each other, it looks a little bit out of order. The text doesn't seem, it seems like there are too many blocks of text, too few images to break that up. And we do have some horizontal lines, so that helps a little bit. But this is why we really want to encourage you to play with the options, test out your styles, make sure that your fonts look the same way that you intend them to. Remember that you may have different text and button and body text styles that are set up for emails than you do on the rest of your site. We encourage you to watch some of our previous blast emailing webinars in order to familiarize yourself with some of the styles that you might be setting up. We ran a little bit earlier, just on time, depending on how you look at it. Devin, how are we doing on questions?
We're doing pretty good. Only really two major ones to speak of that we weren't able to answer directly. One that we can take a look at would be how to change the visibility of an email that has been sent out in the past.
Absolutely. And that's a great question. So you do have the ability to adjust the categorization of previously sent emails. So we'll find one of our last newsletters that we sent, and we can see here when it was sent. And when you go back to edit a newsletter or an email that you've already sent, you can't actually make changes, but you can recategorize that email. So if I want to set up categories now and I've previously been sending out all of my newsletters using blast emailing, I just haven't categorized them, you can go back and of course, it is an individual action. You will have to do it for individual emails that you've sent. There isn't a mass way to edit those categories, but you do have the ability to recategorize and remove or add those emails from that emailings page that we configured.
Someone also asked, if you create a newsletter as a custom page, can you email it out the same way you do for a news article? The short answer on that is no. The slightly more detailed answer would be you would have to send it out as a link instead of using the like embed option that you have for news articles.
Correct. And so then that would add in that one extra step for your members, but it would allow you to display the news article and have a lot more control over how it's displayed. So that's definitely another option that you can throw in there.
And then one last thing that we have is, can you show how to assign a member if you have a member that is supposed to be in charge of these things, but they're only supposed to have control over newsletters? Can you show how to set up a coordinator of just the emailing and news functions?
Absolutely. So we'll go into our control panel. There are a couple of different ways that you can add in a coordinator. We'll go through one of the easier ones, which is right from the control panel. I'm in my communications tab already. We're going to revisit that configure option. And when I select my individual functions, in addition to my configure tab, I have my coordinators tab kind of hanging out in the background there. So for emailing, I can select coordinators, and I have a handful of people who are helping me out with all of the emails that I send out for the Northwest Balloon Club. I select add a coordinator. Keep in mind that this is our standard member selector. So you're searching through your members only. You can search by last name or first name. I'll go ahead and select Bob Abrams to be an additional coordinator here. And then I can go ahead and select the same for our news articles feature. And immediately my changes are saved. So this is, again, the same space where we were going ahead and renaming the modules. At the same time, we can add additional coordinators, and we can at the same time also delete individual coordinators. Additionally, if you don't want to go through the control panel, you can also pop into your club tab. Now, this tab may be renamed depending on the type of organization you are. It could be league, village, association. It could be club. If you select administrators and coordinators towards the bottom of your screen in the setup section, this is where you can manage not just your website administrators, but also additional coordinators. So we can see a list of all of our coordinators across our entire site. So this would be, folks who have individual access to individual things. Bob Abrams does not have access to everything. He only has access to specific functions. So if I select the functions next to Bob Abrams, and I scroll down, I can see, there he is, emailing and news and articles. And those are the only things that he has access to. And I could have added additional items. I can go in and also give Bob Abrams access to text messaging and blogs as well and save those changes. Now, when Bob signs in, he'll see the control panel, but he'll only see the functions that he has access to.
All right. I think that's all the questions that we had.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join our session today. We really appreciate your attendance. We'll have a copy of this webinar available on our YouTube channel in a couple of days, so feel free to go back, take a peek at it, and try out some additional ways to share your newsletters. So without further ado, thanks for joining, and we'll see you in our next webinar. Bye, everyone.